Welcome to the Raising Boys and Girls podcast. I'm Sissy Goff.
I'm David Thomas.
And I'm Melissa Trevathan.
And we're so glad you've set aside a few minutes to spend with us today. In each episode of this podcast, we'll share some of what we're learning in the work we do with kids and families on a daily basis at Daystar Counseling in Nashville, Tennessee. Our goal is to help you care for the kids in your life with a little more understanding, a little more practical help, and a whole lot of hope. So pull up a chair and join us on this journey from our little yellow house to yours.
The Raising Boys and Girls podcast is brought to you in partnership with Minnow. Minnow provides meaningful screen time and shared experiences for families to help you grow in your faith together. Check them out at podcast.gominnow.com. That's podcast.gominno.com. Dave Barnes may be best known for his successful career as a musician and songwriter or as co-host of the wildly popular podcast Dadville. But when his workday is done, when the tour bus parks back in Nashville, or when the song is written, or even when it's not, he returns to real life as husband to his amazing wife, Annie, and dad to his 3 kids. Annie is the beauty and the brains behind this incredible family, holding it all together with lots of wisdom and love.
Dave and Annie, we have wanted you on this podcast for so long. I think we mentioned it to you all 2 years ago, probably, when I ran into you once.
Y'all charge so much, so it took us a couple years just to get the money together. But we're thrilled.
Thank you for investing in Raising Boys and Girls. I think even before we knew you, we both considered you friends, just have loved y'all and heard about you in the community and different things y'all do. And so we're so excited for you to be here. And we'd love to start with y'all telling us a little bit about your family, maybe.
Yeah. Which one?
Y'all buckle up for this podcast.
Good listeners, you have no idea what you're in store for.
So we have 3 kids. Our oldest is Ben. He's 10. He's in 4th grade. Our middle is a little girl, our little joy maker. She's her name is Xana. She is almost 8. She's in 1st grade.
I love her name.
Xana, yeah.
I've never heard that before.
We named her after our moms. My mom is Suzanne, and Dave's mom is Jane. So her name is Susanna Jane.
Aww.
And we wanted to call her Susanna Jane. And about 5 minutes after she was born, we realized that was just too long. So we ended up shortening it. So now Xana is like the perfect little spicy name for this like bundle of joy. We love her. And then our little guy is Sammy. He is 5. He'll be 6 this summer.
Wow.
Yeah, so can we just nap? Is that okay if we just sort of... Do y'all have, I assume a part of the podcast, just letting the parents just nap for like 30 minutes. And then
As you need to.
As you need to. That's right. You hear so much about, and maybe one of y'all has said this, but you know, like the first whatever season of your parenting, you're physically tired, and then it transitions into emotionally tired. And we're right at the cusp where it's transitioning from one to the other, you know? So not quite as tired as we used to be, still tired, but now it's like brain starting to get a little brain fatigue, which I know lasts basically the rest of our lives.
Yes.
You two, we talk some about the Enneagram on this podcast, and we know you both know it well. Could you talk some about what you've learned about yourself, both as people and as parents?
Just jumping right in.
We are.
Get in there. You know, this is a tender topic for Annie because I think like a lot of 8s, she is very sensitive to how they are represented, which is really fair. I do think 8s get a rough... I mean, I think especially 8 women get a really rough go.
You know, I love that you're an 8 and that we're going to talk about it because when we were talking about the questions and David told me you were an 8, I said, are you sure? Really?
Yeah.
You know, I love when
shocked.
people respond that way. And actually, most people do.
I'm sure.
Which I like makes me feel, I feel so happy right now.
And you need to know that's exactly how we feel when someone says, I'd have never dreamed you were a 1.
Yes.
I feel the same way.
I could do a backflip.
Yeah,
I
me
don't,
too.
I don't get that a lot, sadly. People are like, oh, of course, I knew in 7.
But 7s are the only number where every 7 wants to be a 7.
Yes.
Every other number
I can't
doesn't.
imagine.
That's fair.
Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
You like being a 7.
Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
there are heavy downsides, obviously, but I do think there is truth. You know, you do hear like the pros say that, like it is kind of the one number where we're all kind of like, no, it's pretty great, you know. That's also because we're blind to our own pain. And so we're like, there's nothing wrong with me. You know, I'm great all the time. Yeah. Our number combination is a really fun, interesting combo. But I think more better than not, because I think like me being a 7 and Annie being an 8, we have a ton of similarities that are super duper helpful. We're both future oriented. I mean, all of these have the yin and the yang and the strength and the weakness, but I think one of the pros of both of us is that we're very much like what's coming up. We're moving. One of the things that's really tricky about that is we have a lot of friends in our lives who stay with us or, you know, have seasons where they stay in our back house, like a lot of our single friends or younger friends, artists and people like that. And Annie and I have had to learn that we have to be careful sometimes when we give advice because it tends to be simpatico. There's not really good cop, bad cop. Or because I think our Enneagram numbers have a lot of similarities, we tend to give very similar advice. So it's like there's times where I think people can sit with us and it's almost like getting hit by a fire hose because it's just so, there's not like I'm one side and then she's another side. And I mean, we do to some degree, but I think the good part of that is we tend to really agree on a lot of things. Like I was actually telling a friend yesterday how thankful I am that Annie and I agree on so much spiritual things, parenting, you know, just life things, career things, whatever. And I think a lot of that has to do with us sort of our numbers in some way of like, we tend to like movement. We tend to like going, doing, you know, there's not a lot, which is obviously there's a negative side. There's not a lot of like sit and really think. And it's like, it's all about action. And so I think for better or worse with our sweet kids, they just get a copious amount of sort of like, okay, well, what are we doing about it? Like, where are we going with it? Like, let's don't sit here for too long. Let's move to the next thing. And I think parenting is really interesting too, because I think Annie is a really amazing truth teller. I spent a weekend with Richard Rohr years ago, and one of the things that he said, there was only about 10 or 15 of us, and he taught on the Enneagram, which was amazing. And the rest was tricky, but the Enneagram was extremely helpful. We were having lunch one of the days and we started talking about that. And he said, well, you know, what are you and your wife? And I told him, and of course he was like, of course you're a 7. He's like, look at the wrinkle lines on your eyes, which I was like, isn't it fascinating? Someone that knows it that well physically can tell like how you stand or how you talk or the way you're, you know, whatever. But he said that
not good news for either of our wrinkles is one.
I mean,
all kinds of consternation faces.
Judgy wrinkles.
No,
it's David Nuts.
Yes.
But I think he said something that was so wonderful to hear. He said, you know, his mom was an 8. And I think about this so much. He's like, it really is one of the greatest gifts to a kid that a parent is an 8 because the kid always knows the orientation.
Yes.
Like, this is always the truth. Like, Mom, do I look good in this? I don't really love that dress. Okay. Like, hey, should we do this? No, you shouldn't do it. Like, and I thought, what a great way to think about that is that our kids have this huge gift with Annie where I cannot be quite as truthful or, you know, I'm just a little more concerned with like, oh, is this going to hurt feelings or how can I say this in the kindest way? Where Annie is much more concerned with the truth being known and understood. And so it's really interesting watching our kids because I've seen that to be true. Like, sure, there are times where something may come off a little sharp, but most of the time, one, they are oriented to that's how she communicates already. And you can see that. Like, I think if they weren't, they'd be a little more gobsmacked or whatever. But you can see that they're like, oh, yeah, okay, cool. That's how she cares for them is to say, hey, this is the truth. And I just thought that was such a beautiful way to think about that. It's like an 8 parent, I'd say maybe even especially a mom, is such an interesting thing because I think the kids can always go to her and go, you're always going to tell me the truth. So I never have to wonder, God, as you walk into school, like, Mom said I look pretty, but I just don't, it's going to be like, no, like, I think this is the truth, you know? So I think that's a real gift that Annie and her personality type brings to kids, which is really helpful because I think I can be a little more like, oh, should we kid glove this a little more or whatever, which I think is a good combo. But
I would think too, they have a real sense that you're for them.
Yes.
I mean, I think they would never question
Extremely
that you are for
That's
them.
right. That's really well said.
Yeah, well.
I don't know that I've ever said this to you or not, but my Enneagram teacher once said that no one has the capacity to make kids feel safe in this world the way an 8 parent could.
Wow.
And I
That's
remember listening to that and thinking about who I know you to be, like no one has the capacity to make them feel that safe or that loved out of that strength. And I'm thinking, when you said the word combo, I'm thinking about the amount of strength and love and joy and enjoyment you two bring. Like I think, what a gift to your children.
Yeah.
That
Well,
you all bring
too,
all
I think
that.
one of the things that is so fun about our wings, because we share each other's wings.
Yeah.
Her wing is a 9. We don't share that one. So obviously our communication is great. And just how well we know each other, you can see, is really paramount. No, but one of the things that I think is really fun about Annie is she has such a strong pull toward adventure. You know, that's that 7 part of her that's like, let's go and do and have fun and experience life and really live big and go do, which I enjoy too. It's funny because I think she enjoys that more than I do, which you wouldn't think is the truth, but it is. So there's just all these really fun ways that we complement each other. I think more than we don't, which I'm really thankful for. I mean, obviously, there's an 8 part of me that gets scrappy and can get scrappy with her because she's kind of already got that bend. But it is cool. I think it's better than not. You know, I think it could have problem parts that obviously we have to navigate through, but I think they're very much smaller than the things that tend to really work well. Yeah. You know what I mean? But it is powerful. It's like a lot of gas in that tank for the combo. I think we've had to really learn, I think, over our marriage how, especially when we are in agreement on something, it is a freight train. Like we are very convinced and we go very strong toward whatever that is, which can be wonderful. But I think, you know, there's times when you kind of realize there's some gentility that sort of has to be applied. To y'all's point, I think the thing about Annie that's so great with our kids is it's amazing, and y'all have probably seen this in other 8s too, but her ability to just sort of take on, which is really tricky too. She just has an ability to kind of do and take on that's pretty superhuman, you know, where it's like, she's just kind of like, yeah, I can make that happen. I can do that too. We can, and you know, obviously she has to be careful of that, but for her kids, it's really astounding, like how much she's sort of like, no, we can do that. And sort of always pulling me where I'm very much like, let's guard our time and let's really be careful with what we commit to. She's sort of like, no, we can do it. And I'm always like, you can do it. You know, like I'm much more careful about those things. But it's something I think as we've parented now for 10 years, I told her this last night, I probably have the most respect for her about is like, she's just so up for whatever she feels like will help. Or like she's got a really strong, her 2 thing is really, really, I don't know if y'all have gotten into the stack stuff yet, but like her 2 stack, I mean, it is pushing that 8 real hard. And so it's really fun to see her as a parent for as firm as she can be. She's also extremely like helpful. Yes. And to your point, like, what do you need me to do? I'll do it. Like, Ben, what do we got to do? I'll go do that. Like, Sam, you need me to, well, I'll do it. That's not a gift of mine. I'm a little too self-aware for those things. So she really does pull me that way and sort of helps challenge me to kind of like step into spaces that I'm not super comfortable doing, that she's sort of like Teflon for. You know, she's just kind of like, oh, we're good. You know, it's really, it's admirable.
One of the ways it's helped me so much, the Enneagram, is it's like giving me so much self-awareness that otherwise I wouldn't have. I'm more aware, not just because of what Dave communicates back to me, but just reading it on my own, learning that my sort of style of communication can sometimes be twisted, you know, and the way that I'm thinking about it doesn't necessarily come out the way that I'm wanting it to. And so I think it's really helped me. And Dave is so good about this, continuing to ask our kids, like, are we okay? Or is there something I can be doing better? Like kind of those check-ins. But it's helped us create this conversation around what our intentions are and if we hurt our feelings. Like just the other day, I was sitting in the kitchen. I didn't even tell you this. And Ben asked if he could get some food, like yogurt or a bar or something. And it was after we'd eaten dinner. And like, that's one of the things that just drives me nuts. Like we just ate dinner, you know? Yeah. So I'm like really frustrated. And he was asking for, you know, yogurt or something. And I was like, ugh, definitely like just not happy about it. And sweet Ben, he got the yogurt and then he came up to me a few minutes later and he was like, hey, I could tell that you get really frustrated sometimes when I ask you if I can have food.
Wow.
Is that because you, and he was just in a genuinely kind, sweet place. Like, is that because you don't want me to eat more food? Or is that because And he just kind of laid out all these options. And it was so humbling, first of all. But secondly, the fact that he feels the freedom because of the way we've set up, hopefully, this open dialogue, that he can come to me and be like, I noticed this about you. So will you explain where that's coming from? And do you want me to not ask you? Would you rather me just go get my own food and not ask you? But like those conversations of like, you know what, buddy, that is on me. I'm sorry that I got frustrated. This is why, and you can always have food. If you're hungry, you can have food,
But I think, too, that's such a gift of your personality type, too. And I know we've already said this, but I think Ben knows exactly how you feel in that moment. There's no like, why did mom go outside and she's pacing in the front yard, like staring at the house? It's like, oh, no, I could tell you were mad immediately. Like your face changed. You looked at me, you made a noise. And that's kind of another gift of, I think, the 8 is you're never like, that is one of the best gifts to me as her husband is I'm never, ever like, I wonder if she's upset. And I have friends who really struggle with that with their wives because they have to sort of plumb the depths of their heart to kind of get to what's going on. And by the grace of God, I'm a terrible spelunker. So it's such a gift that I can sort of just go, okay, you're mad. Let's talk about why you're mad. And I think that's a gift to the kids because like Ben could go like, oh, wow, you immediately got angry. And I think that's another good thing of that is that there's no sort of like, mom seems a little, it's just right there. Or it's not. It's completely not, which is really great.
Yeah.
It's either like, wow, she is feeling something or she's not. And she's normal. There's no like, oh, I'm having to read this situation. Or, one of the kids come to me like, hey, is everything? It's like, no, so let's deal with it, which is just the easier thing to do.
What a gift that y'all have created an environment where one of your kids could come to either of you. I mean, that's amazing. That he would feel the freedom to do that, number one, that he would have the words to do it, number two, that has so much to do with who y'all are.
We are really good parents. I wondered when y'all were going to ask us to come on because I assume this is the season finale or maybe the end of the whole podcast. That's a real compliment.
I mean that, Dave.
Annie literally said when we got the invitation, she's like, is this for real? Like, what are we going to talk about? I was like, I don't know. I can tell them what other people say.
That's so unusual. And I think that's only going to benefit the rest of his life relationships. I feel like 8s can be the most intimidating personality. We can be too. 1s can be too. But I think for him to learn that he has someone in his life with that kind of strength and he can still go to them and say that, I think that will carry with him forever too, because he won't shrink back from someone who has a lot of strength and he'll feel like he can say something trusting that they're for him because that's who you've been and what you've taught him. So I love that.
Thanks. I know. It's like a constant battle to be vulnerable in the midst of that strength and like apologize. I feel like I'm constantly trying to humble myself just to balance out.
But you do such a good job of that though, babe. You do.
This is such evidence of why we love this tool, why we use it a lot in our practice, and how I think it changes the game for couples and for parents. I mean, you all are such evidence of that you are allowing that tool to teach you things about yourselves and the way you interact with each other in the world that, as Sissy said, your kids get to grow up in the safety of that. So
it is really hard not to swallow the pill of like diagnosing your kids, though. One of us to be like, we're like, don't do it. And I'm like, I know, but he just said this the other day. And I'm like, don't do it. Just let them grow up. And then at some point, I'm sure it'll become more obvious later, but not now. We're going to let them bloom, into who they are. But that is one of the things that's really tricky about that personality typing. It's like, he wants to make his bed up every morning. He's a 1. Classic 1, or whatever it is.
That's so good. Yes. So the first time I met you, we sat down, which even that says so much about you, Annie, that you scheduled a time to come meet with me, us never having met, just to talk about this group of girls you were working with and wanting to figure out how to love them best, how to equip them with where they were. I mean, I just have always respected you from that.
Oh, thanks, Sissy.
Yes, well, I really mean it. And we talk so much about the importance of other voices in kids' lives, which you have certainly done through that. Why would you say that's important, and what has it been like kind of offering that to those girls?
Oh, thanks, Sissy. Honestly, I feel so ill-equipped to even talk about that because I honestly just feel like God just opened a door and it was something years and years ago that seemed like something I could do. So I just stepped into this place, which is exactly why I ended up in your office. And I've never felt like I was very good at it. It was just more about showing up. I never really knew the right things to say. I still don't. I don't have like all these profound thoughts or teaching skills or anything like that. It was just mainly that I opened my door and I made a space in my life and in my time for these girls. And through the years, getting to see them have that place for themselves was really such a privilege. Yeah. I don't know. I think the culture in the world, especially for young girls, it's just so hard to look for all these places to tell you who you are, to tell you how to compare yourself and who to be. And the gift of having a spot to come every week and learn what Jesus says about you and the truth of the Word of God in your life is just transform. I mean, it really is transformative. And I think even in the midst of that, it was so humbling for me to see the benefits of it. And sometimes you don't see that, you don't see that till years later or maybe never. But I found that there's so many voices that are not healthy speaking to these girls. One of the things I learned through the years was to try to hone in on the voices that could speak the truth. I'll never forget, Dave had just gone to this men's group. This was a few years ago. He'd just gone to this men's group, and they did this exercise, which at the time I'd never heard of. One of the guys leading the group was like, let's take a minute and everyone speak words to this one guy. I think it was music people that y'all didn't even really know each other very well, but you got to say, this is what I think of you, and this is how you've impacted me from a distance. And he came home that day being like, this was so amazing. Seeing this guy be so blessed by these people that didn't even really know him very well, but they're speaking to him about how he's impacted them from a distance. It hit me. I was like, that's so crazy. Well, then several days later, it's so funny how God works. I ended up on a high school youth retreat, and I was in charge of doing a small group for the high school girls at my church. So there were probably 25, 30 girls in this camp cabin, all sitting on bunk beds. And we were there later after the talk. And one girl in particular that always was more vulnerable than everybody else just kind of led the time by saying how much she was struggling and having a hard time because she didn't know who she was, or she didn't feel like God was really showing up for her, or whatever the thing was. And just because of what I'd heard through Dave, it dawned on me, maybe this is a moment here. I was like, you know what, let's try something. Again, this is 10th through 12th or something girls. And this one particular girl was maybe a junior or something. So she wasn't close to all these girls. I was like, I'd like for everybody to say what you think about her. What are some things that you have experienced from a distance that you know about her? It threw her for a loop because all these girls are speaking these words of encouragement. We ended up going around. It took 2.5 hours. I didn't get home till after midnight, but we went around the room, and every single girl, I was like, let's do it for this girl. Let's do it for this girl. And I was blown away. There's this one particular girl who was adopted. I don't know if she ever had received. And she was weeping. I mean, could not hold it together, weeping the whole time people were talking about her. These are the voices, these voices of the peers in a safe place where we're intentional about encouraging. Those are important voices. Yeah. For these girls to hear what encouragement looks like from each other, I felt like this is a gift I can give them and just be a wallflower in some ways to see what God is going to do and how he's going to encourage these girls. And
that's beautiful.
Yeah, it's just trying to find the voices that are important, that are good, and using those to impact. Because as you know, they probably aren't listening to their moms.
Right.
Right. We're praying that especially Xana will have some voices in her life that can point her to the truth about herself and about the Lord and what he says about her.
As you're saying that, I'm thinking about, I feel like a lot of moms probably felt like, okay, my early 20s were the time to do that. That was when I needed to be helping with a small group of girls. How would I find time now that I have 2 or 3 or 4 kids? Why would you say to do it, or what has it created in you doing that every time?
I think definitely start when you're in your 20s. Because once you get a pattern, it's easier to keep,
That's
you know?
true. Yes.
And
Great.
if I started now, I think it would be so much harder because your calendar is already full.
Right.
You know what I mean? Whenever my girls graduate, I always say, college is about you.
Mm.
So find ways to make it not about you.
Oh, that's so
You know,
good.
like
Incredible.
go lead a small group or go
Yes.
to a nursing home or go do something that is not about you.
Mm.
And that creates like a habit and a pattern in your life to like be giving something that's not about you. And I think that the older you get, I don't know, maybe it's harder to find the time to do that.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
And thinking about your voices in the lives of others, Dave, you have a podcast that we love and encourage parents to listen to regularly. Will you talk about why you started Dadville and what you hope parents experience from it?
It was really so that Annie could see how wise I was. And I felt like if I recorded myself enough, we could cobble together about 30 seconds of wisdom, even if we just chop the words up to make it work.
You're so wise, Dave.
Yeah, there it is. Okay, the podcast is done, everybody. It's been a good run. No, I'd been thinking about getting into that space a little bit because I'd just kind of gotten into podcasts myself. This is probably 5 years ago, but couldn't figure out what to do. And so this is hysterical. I was at William Morris at the time, booked by them. And we met with their podcast woman who oversaw maybe like all of the William Morris kind of clients' podcast stuff. It felt like such a sitcom because we sat with her and she's like, all right, let me tell you the spaces that are full. She's like, there's too much music. There's too much whatever. She's like, what are things you're really passionate about? I was like, well, music, obviously. My wife, just gonna talk about her all the time. But then I said, I love my family. She's like, that's not a space for dads. There's like kind of nobody doing that. And I was like, really? She's like, yeah. And I'd had this is a much longer story, but I had this idea for a sitcom called Dadville about dads and stuff, which, maybe someday it'll happen. But I was like, oh, what if I did like, and she's like, that's great. That's a really cool idea. And then it was like, and then I was talking to one of my really dear friends, a guy named Seth Philpott, and I was telling Seth, I just don't know if it's something I want to do by myself. That's a little like singular. And he's like, ask John to do it. I was like, that's perfect. Because John and I would sit and talk about this. They live across the street. And so we would spend hours catching up, just talking about kids or dad stuff. So that was kind of the impetus. And it was hysterical. I'm sure y'all feel this way, but you just never know how those things are going to iterate. Like, what's it going to turn into? Is it going to be like a yuckity? Because our initial thought was it was really going to be sort of a comedy podcast. Like, let's talk about what do you do when the lawnmower doesn't start or whatever. And I think pretty quickly we realized as we had people like you on, David, it was like, oh, this has a potential to really be deeply impactful. And I think we both kind of were like, we should probably pivot. And so I think once we saw that, it really shifted. Really, the bedrock of it is just getting dads on, having fun, hearing their story, laughing, being ridiculous, but also having moments of poignancy where you can talk about kids or even how they grew up and their parents, whatever. It's now sort of shifted into this really fun space where I think we're really trying to celebrate dads and create a space for a dad to talk about his kids and to talk about his family and it be kind of a safe space for that because, I think we also realize like you're just never going to see, especially our friends who are in the public sphere, sort of spotlight, the question they never get asked is like, tell us about your kids or what is it like being a dad? Nobody asks that question. It's just not a red carpet or Today Show question. Maybe toward the end, like, oh, you got a kids? Well, tell us about them. Okay, great. Well, all right, that was so-and-so, Yeah. But to really give them a space, because I don't know any dad who doesn't want to talk about his kids. So I think it's been fun to kind of give a little bit of an arena for that with dads. The other part we really enjoy is having experts on like you, David, where it's like you can really have these moments. It just feels like a selfish venture. The amount of wisdom that we take on from doing this show is just insane, We'll have conversations, just he and I over lunch or something, and it'll be like, I've been thinking about it. Remember when David said this? Like, you know what I mean? So it's really cool because it sort of feels like this really selfish thing, really, honestly. I was at the Nashville SC game the other night. We took the kids. It was so much fun. And this guy stops me and is like, gosh, such a big fan. Can we get a picture? Sure. And as he leaves, he doesn't say like, I love your music. He says, man, Dadville's the best.
Oh,
I was like, that's so
wow.
great. I also have music though. But that happens a lot. Like John and I have gotten into a habit where we'll kind of text each other little encouragements. You just never know with those kind of things if it's resonating or whatever. But yeah, it's just been such a tremendous source of joy. And I also get excited that someday our kids can listen to it. I think that's one of the gifts in the long term, that our kids, if they ever get curious and go like, I wonder what Dad thought about these things or thinks about these things, that there's copious amounts of, airtime for them to listen and hear. So it's great. And I was going to say too, retrospectively, like we had Kurt Thompson on, who, is just man genius. And he talked about how our brains are literally wired for community, but especially in the way of someone telling us who we are, like people speaking truth. Like there are neurological events happening when that happens. Your brain shifts when you have someone look at you and go like, hey, you're a great dad, you're great. And it's like it absorbs it because it needs to, and it shifts because it needs to, because it just solidifies who we are. And so I think just learning those kind of things, you're like, wow. That's the other thing too, John and I laugh probably the most about is like, when will we ever get to sit and have these conversations except for this podcast? That's what makes it especially fun, is you're like, yeah, you just never sit and talk about these things. Or I'd never meet half of the people if we weren't doing it. So it's really cool. It's been a huge source of joy and wisdom, truthfully, maybe as much as anything.
The Raising Boys and Girls podcast is brought to you in partnership with Minnow. Did you know that Minnow has an award-winning children's Bible? Written by VeggieTales creator Phil Vischer, the Minnow Laugh and Grow Bible for Kids is more than a children's Bible storybook. It's a deep, engaging, and whimsical gospel experience. Each Bible story is vividly illustrated, takes just minutes to read, and includes a family connection to encourage readers to learn, talk, and pray together. Find out more at shop.gominnow.com. That's shop.gominno.com.
This season of our podcast is called Modern Parents, Vintage Values. We've been talking a lot about kids and where they struggle, obviously. What would y'all say is a vintage value that you think kids struggle with today, and how can we help them get to it?
This has to be the most common answer, but I think screen time and like how, Annie and I literally talked about this last night as we were going to bed. Our kids just really aren't on screens as far as like iPads, computers, and phones and stuff. And,
Right.
slowly but surely, like obviously TV, like they watch shows and stuff, but we just sort of drew a hard line on it. And thankfully they've acquiesced, which has been it. But now,
That's awesome.
as Ben comes home as a 10-year-old, is like, my friends get screen time. We're like, want some pizza? Like how can we avoid? So, Annie brought that up last night. Literally just like, hey, we got to sort of figure out a little better of a groove. I think for me, that's something that is a really interesting thing to have to figure out now that we didn't have to figure out. And especially growing up in, both of us grew up in Mississippi, but I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Mississippi. So, it was like you just got on your bike and we'll see you at lunch, or your skateboard or whatever. There was no option for this other thing. I remember, golly, I would get up in the morning. I remember like in the summer, especially, it'd be like, Mom, can I watch Reading Rainbow this morning? And she's like, phew, and that's it. And I'd be like, oh God. And it was just like sitting there like, oh my God, here we go. Reading Rainbow. Like I have a neurological response to that song. Like there's a Pavlovian thing that happens when that song comes on. Like I just immediately, because it was just like, you can have your one show and then you're like, go outside or go draw or whatever, So I think that is sort of one of the things that is the trickiest to me. That wasn't something we had to sort of navigate. And again, like Annie said last night, she's like, it's not that it's all bad. It's not like you got to have this like zero tolerance policy for it, but I do think it scares me more than I get like excited about it.
Yeah.
Do you have a thought?
I think that our kids these days don't value as much the older generations. I remember growing up and like going to nursing homes and singing Christmas carols at Christmas time or doing things that involved different generations and different socioeconomic. That's one thing that I am trying in our little family to really get us outside of this bubble. It seems to me, and maybe I'm just on the front end of it, and maybe it's not this way, but it seems to me that our culture is so much more about ourselves. As our kids get older, it seems like there's more pressure on the parents. We have to be more intentional to get them outside of their own little space and their own peers and their own bubbles. And I know that's on every parent everywhere, but I want my kids to appreciate old people and people that don't look like them. And there's not as many opportunities, it doesn't seem like, to really introduce that or make that something that they're used to.
Y'all know Shower Up? It's such a cool organization, but classic Annie. Did you meet him or how did you?
I think on Instagram, yeah.
But so they have these mobile showers for homeless people and they go down every Tuesday night.
It's every day of the week.
Oh, that's right. During when it gets warm. That's right. People love in Nashville, the lamp is, it's everything you know it's going to be. You take your kids and you're like, you know the script. They're going to hate being here. About 5 minutes in, they take some ownership and then they're like, that was pretty cool, you know, because they have a role. Like each of them immediately, you walk up and the guy's like, all right, Ben, will you help with towels? You know, Sam, will you help me clean the things? Anna, will you get all the like socks and underwear out on the table? And you just see them. Annie has such a great bend for that stuff. Like she has always got an eye on those things, but I think that's so true. Y'all know this better anyway. There is such a push in our society in 2022 to self and let's get me figured out and my thing, and I got to get my thing figured out and then I can go out into the world. But God, how am I doing today? I don't want. If there's anything that I've learned in my Christian walk, it is that maybe one of the top 3 things that God is just pounding into my brain is how much we are not just spiritually but physically, neurologically made for community. We are made to be with other people. God never meant us to be alone. Solitude is different, but we are meant to be in a body of people all the time. We are communal beings. And I think that is something that's really hard about what is happening in culture today is everything is so singular and it's pushing so hard toward self and self-realization and being true to yourself and self and self and self. And there's a good part of that. But I think the macro vision is like, but then we turn around and we go right back toward people. We go right back toward people. We go back toward people, go back toward people. There's probably never been an easier time maybe in society to just do your own thing and be celebrated for that. But I think what God is saying is like, no. That's not the plan here. Like, let's move back toward people. And I think that's where what Kurt said is so powerful, is that's what we're physically made. Like, that is how we are wired to be. We are wired to be together. We're wired to be with people. And for as much as we think we're going to realize on our own, so much more of that is meant to be done in a group, you know, and a collection of people that give you that identity, that help tell you who you are, reinforce those things, or challenge you to get out of who you think you are to be the person God made you to be, or whatever it is. That's the end of my TED Talk. Thank you for coming.
Okay, you know what I want to point out? As you all were saying that, like, I'm going to circle back real quick to the Enneagram, because you just lived out another great example of the strengths of your numbers. Like, I love when you told that story and you said, we know the script. They won't want to do it. We'll get there 10 minutes in. And I think for both of you, when you were talking about doing dominant and that you go forward, I love that about working with parents in that space, as opposed to, I challenge parents, 1s, 2s, and 6s listening, and the dependent stance are like, oh, they're not going to want to do it. It'll be so hard. They're so oriented to how other people are going to perceive it. Whereas you all are like, I hear you grumbling, hop in the car, we're heading. And that is such a gift of your numbers, you all. And where parents who are in other numbers are going to have to work harder to push through the grumbling and go, because you wisely know this is going to be an amazing experience for our kids and for our family. So
that is more Annie's skill set than mine.
I love that.
I can lean pretty hard on like, this could be a nightmare.
Yes.
She's like,
Dave's a grumbler.
There's the strength part.
Yeah.
You have to drag him too sometimes.
I do.
Yeah, that's the truth. It's the truth.
Okay, let's keep it in the old school for a minute. You were talking about a favorite show. Any other favorite shows or books or music that you love growing up?
Oh my gosh. This is where my 7 thing just, like, I just start to hum and glow. I have such fond memories of driving to Jackson, where Annie grew up, though we didn't know each other at the time, and like going to movies, because it was just like such a rarity. It was such a treat. Like, Oh man, it was almost like a holy experience going to get the popcorn. I was like, oh my God, here we go. It's gonna be. I was watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Batman, whatever movie was coming out at the time. Mine was a weird existence because growing up in the middle of nowhere, that entertainment was just, again, the script for this, it's so funny because you talk about sevens, and one of the things they say about sevens is one of the things that starts the arc for you being one is you are under entertained. Your access to things that can entertain you is low, so you sort of turn that's who you become. It's like, I have to entertain myself and become, and if you look at my story, I mean, it is so obvious. I mean, 8,000 people in this tiny Mississippi town, like there was just no ways. Music was a huge part. Like mom and dad loved music and always had music on, so that's even at a osmotic level, it was just always happening. And books, I mean, obviously, we had libraries. It wasn't like we had to go to some place in the woods and ask some lady and mow her yard, and she'd be like, here's a book for the week, But, growing up in the middle of nowhere, you just didn't really have access to those kind of things. Obviously, we had TV, but you couldn't even get MTV or Nickelodeon or those things because it just wasn't an option back then. So for us, it was a lot more like outside and running around. But I loved music. Mom and dad loved music. TV shows really weren't a thing for us. That was just not a part of our life. Like, although, which is funny, Saturday Night Live was, which is weird to think about. And boy, does that tell you some things. But like, we weren't a family that did like, let's all go watch our show at night or.
We did that.
Yeah.
We did like Little House on the Prairie and like Anne of Avonlea. And we had like shows that we watched together as a family.
And y'all, music with the McGees was like a lot of very like.
Instrumental.
Yeah,
new
very
age.
calming.
Yeah.
Like pastoral.
Yeah. When I think about my high school years, the one source of media that stands out, you're going to so laugh at this, is I played basketball growing up.
And he played everything growing up.
And my like best girlfriends that we all played together, we got obsessed with this documentary of the like 1998 or I don't know what it was. UT women's basketball, this documentary of their whole like
season in review.
They won a national championship. We watched that thing to the point where all of me and my friends could quote the girls' lines. It was like Mary Chapin Carpenter was in the background with the video.
Which
like
who put that together, by the way? Let's don't get like Bon Jovi. Let's get like Mary Chapin Carpenter for the pump up music. Passionate kisses.
No, it was Sometimes You're the Windshield, Sometimes You're the Bug.
There you go.
Yeah. Anyway, that's like the one thing that stands out the most. Is watching that over and over and over again.
Doesn't it speak to what y'all are kind of, maybe you don't mean to infer with that question, but my access to those things was so limited.
Yes.
And even with Annie living in metropolitan, air quotes, Jackson, it was just limited. Like you couldn't kind of entertain yourself. You kind of had to go figure something out. I had Bible study with my guy friends this morning, and one of the dads said this, we all dread summer with our kids. And it's not that we didn't do this as kids. I want to be really clear. I did this to my parents. But let's just keep account for how many times our kids come in and go like, Dad, I'm bored. And it's like, if you want to see Annie and I get triggered, like little Mississippi kids with nothing to do, I'm like, you think you were bored? It's like, I mean, it just, man, it like calls the fire out in me. I'm like, we bought you 9,000 toys. You got an Xbox. They're like, okay, let's go back outside. And they sort of slowly walk back out.
Reverse route.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Well, that kind of pertains to the question I was going to ask. What was true about life back then that you still wish was true today? And that may be part of your answer, Dave. But
yeah. Parents are a great perspective. Like I'll talk to my parents and I'll go, man, and they're just like, no. Is that how you felt? That's so good. They're kind of a nice truth serum to that a little bit because I feel like I can definitely romanticize parts of that where it was like, maybe it was, you were bored a lot too, or like you drove us crazy. Where I'm like, no, I was on my bike having adventures. They're like, well, maybe not. You were asking for pudding pops 9 times a day. But or
make those pudding
flavor
pops?
Ice. I don't know. How about flavor ice though? Can we get a shout out to flavor ice and those popsicles?
Yes.
One thing I lament a lot and am really sad about is how much pressure there is on high school kids these days. And I just wish we could raise that ceiling again. Because I feel like when I was and maybe it was just a different place that I lived. I don't know. But it just seems like the amount of pressure that is on these kids, and some of it's self-inflicted, some of it's from academics, whatever. It's just debilitating. And that makes me so sad for them, just to like, I don't know, it just feels like it's stealing their joy and their enjoyment of life and just their childhood in a lot of ways. And that makes me sad. I think about that a lot.
You know, two things. One, I've basically gotten off Instagram. I still check DMs and I'll post things, but I don't scroll anymore or check stories. That's been 4 months now. I always give it up for Lynn every year. And I'm always like, God, I've just never been so clear-brained. And I finally this year was like, I just don't want to do this anymore. And I mean, y'all know this. There are physical changes. Like I can feel it. It's like getting off a drug. So one, I think that resonates even as a 43-year-old man. I'm like, this isn't native to just kids. Like this is a very real struggle for me. And I think what I always take away from that is I'm not supposed to know everything about everybody. That was never a plan in God's great economy. You take care of your one line of plants that like you got your little thing you're going on, take care of that. I'll take care of the rest. And I think it does deceive us into being a little godlike, like we need to know everything about everybody. And what's everybody doing? That informs how I feel about myself. And I think that's a bunch of hogwash. And I think we should just nuke social media. That's just my opinion. That said, hearkening back a couple of questions ago, to your point, Sissy, like Annie had done all these Bible studies with these girls. High school girls, she'd be with them for a couple of years at the covenant where we go to church, and then, they'd graduate, and then she'd say, I'm done with that. And then somebody would come to her and go, you do these and you do them great. And she's like, I'm back in. And I'll never forget, like, they were always really consistent. Like I'd always say, had to go tonight. And she'd be like, for those first really 3, which started probably 10 years ago, maybe, it was always so consistent. Like, oh, it's boy stuff, or, some of the girls struggling with this or that. And it wasn't that it was light, but it was without a significant weight. And we talk and then we go to sleep. I'll never forget that last one she did. And it's why she called you, Sissy. Like 2 or 3 in, she walked upstairs and she's like, I don't think I can do this. This is above my pay grade. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, this isn't boys and maybe some food stuff or image. This is like really disturbing, scary things. This is not what I was trained to do. And that's why she called you. And so I think you see how much
things have changed.
They have, obviously y'all are at the front lines of that, but gosh, they have changed. And I think just watching Annie walk and struggle through that, I was like, man, even in 2 to 3 years, it's so tricky,
You all, along those lines, we've never seen parents as weary as in this season. What would you want to say to other parents who are experiencing weariness or hopelessness in this season?
My first thought is community. I think having somebody to bounce it off is helpful, but I think what we were kind of talking about, just finding other voices for your kids is so valuable because they're not going to listen to you probably. I don't know. Y'all know that better than me, but whether it's like a youth group or a small group somewhere or just to have somebody else that has a voice and figure out what's important to the kids, what voices are important to them. Like I remember one time we had a group of girls, a couple of them were like so concerned that they'd never kissed a boy. And it was really something that at first it was funny and then it became something I was like, this is like a thing. They're really concerned about this. And at the time I had a really good friend who was in a small group with some Vanderbilt baseball players. So I set us up to go to Vanderbilt's campus and sit with these Vanderbilt boys. They were in a Bible study, so I knew they loved Jesus, or at least pretended to.
That was it could have been dicey.
So I asked them to like tell about their life. And then I specifically said, what if you met a girl that you liked and she said she had never kissed a boy? What would you think about that? Wow. And I hadn't prepped them or anything, so I'm hoping like, Lord, you got to take this one. And they said, oh my gosh, that's amazing. I would feel like privileged that they would tell me that.
Wow.
And I never heard another word ever again about these 2 girls that were struggling with that. And I'm like, those are the voice, like what voices are important to them? And how do you figure out where is it that our kids can hear this?
We did that at Hopetown one time about modesty. And I remember one of the boys looking at the girls and saying, as believers, like we feel like you're on our team. And so when you dress really inappropriately, you just got off my team and you made life so much harder for me. And those girls heard it so much louder because it was a cute boy around their age, you know? So yes, I love that about other voices. I know.
I'm having to consolidate a lot of thoughts that are not native to me. God knows what he's doing. You were made for a time like this. It was not a mistake that we were born now, and then we have kids that were born when they were born, and then we are fostering and caring and parenting them through these things. So I think that's one, is that God knows what he's doing. I think we can all rest and we can do this, right? Our pastor, Chad, had a really great word about this the other day, and we were going through Hebrews, and I'm paraphrasing this into oblivion, but basically there's a scripture at the very end of Hebrews where he kind of says, parents, discipline your kids as best you can, but ultimately God's got it. And I think there's something really affirming about that God knows our weaknesses and our shortcomings. That's okay. Let's do the best we can, knowing God's going to sweep up the mess. I think two of my biggest takeaways from having people on the show have been really these two things. One, I think apologizing to our kids, just really leaning into Annie and I try to do, because we mess up in copious amounts, but really being attentive to that didn't go well. And you know it. Every human knows that feeling. You have an interaction and there's a little thing in your spirit that goes yeah, it didn't quite stick that way. Or boy, did we get mad there, didn't we, Dave? And just kind of going, okay, let's take a beat and then go back as soon as we can and make sense to kind of sit down and with that child and go hey, I really butchered that. I was so angry, I didn't mean to get that mad. Do you forgive me? Having them say they forgive you, which I think really matters, voicing that. Quick funny story. Probably one of the sweetest and most humbling moments of my parenting, Ben, our oldest, who was probably 7 at the time, playing soccer with his team, afternoon practice, and the two coaches who I know really well said, hey, bring your cleats if you want to. We'll just do a little 10-minute into the game that you and a couple of the dads that are there can get in and play with the boys. Dads, obviously, we're not slide tackling with kids, no slide tackle. So we're playing, and one of my son's best friends comes in and slide tackles me and hits me immediately. I look down, and there are cleat marks, and my leg is already starting to swell. It hurt as bad as anything I've ever felt in my life. And I get up and shame this kid into the middle of the earth. I stand up, and I'm first of all, I yelled a word that the Lord doesn't use or is not in the Bible. And I just said, what are you doing? Did you not hear? And I felt bad for him for a lot of reasons. One, because I'm shaming him and I'm mad. But two, do you know that thing in a kid where they're I've hurt a big person.
Yes.
And I don't know what to do with this feeling. One, I can do that. And two, you can feel like that. And so there's a lot of things happening in that moment. But I'm just did you not hear? And the dads are kind of with me. They run over and one of them's dad is there. And he's what are you doing? And the kid felt terrible. But he came in hot. It hurt so bad, and I had to kind of hobble off the field. It, swelled up immediately, and 2 weeks, it just looked like it was terrible. Anyway, I felt so bad. I'm standing on the sideline, and I'm I could not have handled that worse. And the kid, he's a kid, so he's back up and he's running around. Well, in God's sort of great sense of humor, he's riding with us home. So I'm and I can hear Jesus just Dave, and I'm I know. So we get back to the car, and I'm okay. He's already just bubbling around, and he's fine. I said, hey, would you come here for a second? And he's kind of looking at me, and he's either I'm about to get reamed, or I don't know where this is going. And I kind of get down on my knees and say, hey, bud, God, I'm really sorry. I'm really mad at you, and I said a word I shouldn't have said. I've never seen a child so uncomfortable, because he's kind of looking at me, and he's okay. And I said, so will you forgive me? And he's yeah, sure. And I was no, but I should not act like that. And sweet Ben comes over and he puts his hand on his back and he says, hey, it's okay. He does this with me all the time. And I thought, and it was this double emotion in me of God, this is embarrassing that my kid is having to go hey, but God, what a gift that my kid is this is what my dad does, which is still makes me emotional. But I think for me was this really potent moment of isn't it cool that Ben knows that's what we do? Even now I'm God, I hope that carries on. So I do think apologizing to your kids is such a big deal. And I think the other thing that the guy said on Dadville that I think about all the time, we were talking about grown kids, and this guy's my age. He was talking about how he's so fascinated by families that have kids that are older that still spend a lot of time together. They bring their families home and they want to go on family trips. I said, what do you think that is? Like, how do those parents pull that off? Like, what's the magic thing? And he said, it's a fascination of mine too, Dave. And he said, I ask every single set of parents that do that well, like, what have you done? Like, what's the magic sauce? And he said, consistently, almost unanimously, it's some version of them saying, stay interested. Just pay attention and stay interested. And I thought, isn't that such an easy but beautiful thing to hear? Just like when they're talking to you about something, listen, how's the movie tonight? Or how did the day go? Or like, tell me more about that. Or, and I thought, God, that it's just that simple. I mean, it's insanely hard, but so beautiful just to stay interested. Just when they're talking, like, listen to them. Or when they have something they want to tell you, like, really stop what you're doing and like go, oh, and then ask another question about it, It's like, that's such a good word. And I think these are things that are doable that hopefully are encouraging. But I know for me, give me like a lot of hope. Because I'm like, if I try hard, I think I can do these things, at least most of the time.
So good. Well, I hate to even be at the point where we're talking about wrapping up, but for folks who've been listening, where can they find y'all? You mentioned Dadville.
Yeah.
You, under your breath, mentioned that you did some music.
I dabble. No, yeah. So Dadville's out there. Follow them out with Lady A, which is fun. I'm opening for them, and we're doing a lot of shows around, and then Christmas shows and music, and it's all happening. Always evolving, always changing.
You too. It has been beyond fun to be with you. We couldn't thank you enough for giving us this kind of time. And we love to end with something kind of fun. And if we could share, which we hope we can at some point in the near future, a taco with the two of you, what would that taco be?
Now, are we talking store?
You can purchase,
Taco,
you can
I can
make
answer
it.
any.
Ladybird.
Well, then you have to be honest, though. Don't be cooler than you are. If you could
Taco
really
Bell.
There we go. I knew it. One of my
some Taco Bell?
I do.
One of my favorite Annie stories ever in all
But
of
if
time.
I'm being cool, it's Ladybird.
Yeah. If literally of all time, she had gone out with some friends, her girlfriends. John went somewhere nice, like in East Nashville.
Cafe Rouge or something.
Cafe Rouge. And they're like, it's her and her girls, and they're having a girls' night, and they're getting, nice drinks and this nice meal. I laughed until I thought I was going to TT on myself, because later that night, I'm like, how's it going? She's like, well, you'll love this. And she sends a video of them driving through Taco Bell at like 10:15 p.m. And I was like, what? And she's like, yeah, it wasn't enough food for us. We had to double down. I was like, respect, girl.
So good.
I mean, yeah, Ladybird. There's so many great ones in Nashville. I'm going to stick with Ladybird. But listen, I got a soft spot for Satco.
Yes.
When I was single, my best friend Micah and I lived together, and we knew the staff there, and people I think thought we worked there. That's how much we were there. So that's kind of got a soft spot too.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think you should take us out singing Islands in the Stream.
This one, I don't know how many people know this one. This is an oldie but a goodie. I can just launch in.
The Raising Boys and Girls podcast is brought to you in partnership with Minnow. Minnow helps you make screen time meaningful for your family with shows kids love and values parents trust. Check them out at podcast.gominnow.com. That's podcast.gominno.com.
It's our joy to bring the experience and insight we gain through our work beyond the walls of the Daystar House. Join us next time for more help and hope as you continue your journey of raising boys and girls.